Hi everyone, today's exercises still focus on grayscale and grayscale mixing. We're gonna have the option today of working representationally, so with an object, or abstractly, so maybe thinking about shape, texture, form, using kind of cut paper, collage, and grayscale that you've done in earlier exercises. I'm also going to take a moment and go through the color wheel, look at color bias and complements, and kind of revisit. So for many of you, mixing with complements is something that you've done many times. Some of you, it might be new. But I want to revisit that and talk about it from my perspective and how you can look at the color wheel and then look at actual paint and see how that contributes to grayscale mixing, how you can make warm grays, cool grays, so on and so forth. So there'll be a little bit of a talk first about the color wheel. I'm going to pull up some paint charts because I always save those when I go buy paint myself. And then we'll move to the supplies and the overhead angle, and then of course get to painting. Okay, so bear with me. We'll talk a little bit about the color wheel and then we'll move on to the painting portion of this tutorial. So what I have in front of me here are my very used, as you can see they're flopping around, my very used color wheels that are a staple in my studio. So I have a few, they're from Blick, that's where I bought them. And I've had them for many years. I usually have a stack, some small, some large. And it's not exactly what you buy out of the tube, okay? So this is computer printed and it's not entirely realistic when it comes to what it is, what's gonna actually happen when you're painting, but it gives you a framework and it can be very helpful when you're trying to think of some quick, let's say palettes, or you're struggling maybe with why your pinks aren't looking correct, or why you just can't get your blue light enough or your violet, why things are getting, it kind of sometimes gives you some guidance as far as color harmony is concerned, and then how dark or light a color should be. So on one side, it always has a lot of information here. So if you have a color wheel of your own, please look at it, read some of what's going on in the middle and the side, because it gives you a ton of information. And sometimes we just grab these and go, oh, look, it's all the different colors you can have. And we just maybe, look at the, let's say, tinting or something like that, but we don't really read everything that's going on here. So on the color wheel itself, it always does go through tint, tone, and shade, okay? Again, when you're mixing with your paints, this is gonna be a little bit different. It's not exactly what they have here, but it gives you kind of a framework. The key thing on this side of the color wheel is this complement wheel that I call it, and it gives you a few different examples of complements that you can use in compositions. Or just palette setups, where color harmonies lie. Straight across here is the direct complements. And I always say with complements, they're best friends and worst enemies. When they're side by side, they bring each other out the most. When they're mixed together, they cancel each other, okay? So best of times, worst of times. Those are what complements are. And they're always across from each other on the color wheel. Again, like I said, your actual paint out of the tube is not necessarily what you have here. So the way that's best to think about it is when you have paint on your palette, what leans blue-violet? What leans, let's say, turquoise blue or something like that? What's green? What's all in the green category? What's more of in a yellow-green category? So on and so forth, right? So you kind of have to look at things categorically because they're not gonna match up with your color wheel exactly. And that's gonna help you pick from your palette what kind of complements you need, either to make colors stand out or to mix together to create your grays. And there's a myriad of grays that you can create, okay? There's not just one gray that works. Also, inside of the color wheel are all these different harmonies and relationships. So there's split complements. I tend to use these a lot in my work. There is a triad, that's a triangulation that kind of works a lot like if you do red, blue, yellow, that is a triad, but there's other triads that kind of read like a primary, primary composition, let's say, but they're not primaries. So if I took it to blue, violet, and then red, orange, and then yellow, green, it's reading like a red, blue, yellow, but it's not as basic as a red, blue, yellow, okay? So those are some things to think about as well. When you get to these different tetrads, those are a little more, sometimes that might be too much going on. I don't tend to use tetrads as much myself. I tend to go with the triangulation and an accent color. Okay, but for today, we're gonna be really thinking about complements and where we find them, okay? On the back side of the color wheel, again, this relates to, since we've been talking about value, you see that you have the hues, okay? And then you have this value scale that's on the inside. And sometimes I have students that are like, oh, well, this is interesting. This is just so I know my, let's say, 10-point value scale, so on and so forth. Not really sure what this is for. Well, it's actually to line up value to color. So as you can see, if I take the value scale and I line up some of the darker values with violet, you can see that there's a match there. This is really key when it comes to blue-greens, when it comes to, on the other side, reds, like understanding that these colors actually sit in the middle right out of the tube. And that can really help you if you're working with midtones. You need something in the middle. Again, we're gonna be working with color eventually. So I want you to think about value in terms of color. And as you're working in black and white, think about naming, like what color actually sits in that zone? What color sits in this zone, right? We all know that yellow is gonna sit in that white area, right? So we know that our yellows, whatever we use, are always gonna kind of mix in that highlight. There's gonna give you that sunlight or the spark or the shine, that sort of thing, okay? So that's kind of known. It also shows you that if you're trying to make blue, violet, white, you've got a long way to go. That's a lot of white to add, right? So that's something to take into consideration as well. On the inside, it has this fun little exercise where you see if you add different kinds of colors, right? So yellow to green makes yellow green, that sort of thing. But if you add yellow to violet, what does that create, right? So that makes kind of a brownish color. So maybe you need something along those lines, and this is gonna help you figure that out, okay? That's just a little mini tour of the color wheel. There's always definitions written on there as well. I highly recommend that you grab one of these. What I wanted to do in contrast is actually, so this is my Nova Color chart. These are a very highly pigmented acrylic paint that you can buy in Culver City. So they're produced here in Los Angeles. Again, some of you are working in watercolor, some of you are working in gouache or acrylic or oils, okay? But these charts apply to any paint that you buy, okay? I just happen to have the Nova Color one in my hand right now. And what this does, I strongly recommend when you go buy a series of paint that you grab one of these, right? So you can get an idea of what that company is and what they make. It can seem overwhelming at first, but then you start to realize, oh look, if I want a warm yellow, right? Then I have about 3 that I can choose from. And it looks from this chart that like, if I kind of want to orange lean it a little bit, then I've got a little range there. These are a little bit cooler on this side, okay? And I can buy a range of those because according to this chart, they're kind of similar. So you might be bored with cadmium yellow light and you decided, yeah, I want some bismuth. Let's see what that does. There's a very small variation, but you can see when it comes to your mixing strategies, it's not gonna change your mixing strategies that much, right? It's not that different of a color, right? So you can feel better experimenting if you get the chart and playing around with color a little bit, if you look at this and see what's close to what you want. For example, I paint a lot of pools. I like pools in my landscapes and things like that. Sorry, I cut myself today. It's not like I keep my Band-Aid out of it. But right here, and I have to actually buy these turquoises to get that really shiny pool-like water. I can't get it from that. You can see right here, no matter what I end up mixing that with, it's not gonna look like that. That's a natural, that's something that the company makes, and it has that real kind of fake blue look. Okay, it's something that I need for a composition. Again, fluorescents, where are you gonna get those, okay? So I keep these charts around. These charts are really important and they can help you mix better, they can help you expand your palette, they can help you get the look of things that you want more, okay? So I'm a strong advocate of just picking these up, okay? Again, when we're talking about complement mixing, so you gotta look and say, okay, here we go, I've got blues here, okay, and I've got a range of oranges here. we know that blue and orange kind of cancel each other out. But all of these different blues are gonna give you a bit of a different result depending on what orange you put in there, okay? And on top of that, you've also got earth tones, as you can see. I'm gonna put that up close, that lean either red or orange, okay? And you can get a range of grays there. There's just a lot that you can do, okay? So I'm gonna show you a few different options today. I'm gonna show you how I approach gray mixing and how I can get kind of a range. So it's just not black and white or black out and white. You know, that's your basic. If you need something very neutral, you can go ahead and do that. But if you want to be more creative and you want your base palette to, you know, sometimes I'm thinking of a certain accent color. Like, for example, if I'm gonna go, let's say the cadmium orange deep is an accent that I'm using, right? Well, I'm gonna build my grays out of these range of blues with some of that orange in there. So everything kind of relates. It feels harmonious in the end. So a lot of times I do take this into consideration so that everything in the palette, nothing feels disjointed. It feels harmonious. It feels like the accent was built out of all the other colors that were there, okay? And again, this goes for both representational work and abstract work, right? I say this often, but all painting is abstract, right? So that feeling, if you have someone, sometimes you have someone looking at objects, but you want them to engage with that. So you need to have your color harmonies engaged or your color harmonies working so that everybody looks at everything, the objects that you have in the piece. Same thing goes for abstraction. Good abstraction is going to have this lovely like symphony of color going on, right? That isn't gonna engage the viewer. If it's disjointed, then people are gonna kind of go in quick and then walk away and not really get the feeling of your piece, okay? Again, you can make disjointed color if the whole thing is to kind of jar the audience. That does make sense. But also that comes from knowing what rules you're breaking. So regardless of what your outcome is, good color theory, in my opinion, and that again stems from grayscale mixing, right? So we understand the grayscale well, that means we're gonna understand color well. That is the foundations of painting, in my opinion, okay? And again, why I spend a good amount of time on it and how we build color from neutrals so that you can become the best in your painting. Okay, so I'm gonna go over to the station. We're gonna go look at all the materials and what it is we're working on today. Again, if you're in watercolor, there'll be certain paint and surfaces that I'm working with you on. If you're in oil and acrylic, again, show you those supports and that base. I won't talk much about abstraction, to be honest, because there's photos of that in your assignment prompts. Just know that you have the option of working kind of tearing up your old exercises, working paint on paper, things like that, and then kind of thinking about mark making value form, okay? For this tutorial, it is gonna focus a lot more on the object. So basically, I have a mug and I have the mug on a white background, and it's also going to focus on how I get to the grays that I use for the painting. Okay, see you soon at the painting station. So first I'm gonna go over my setup and then start to get going with the painting. I am working again with a mug Seiko object. I'll do the overhead camera view and then give you an overlay of the photo that I'm working with, or a photo of the subject that I'm working with, so you don't have to look over my shoulder or look at the objects while I'm painting, which is sometimes kind of distracting. For me, I have a picture of it up, and then I have the original setup, so I kind of keep the lighting. Whatever I show you is what the lighting that I'm going to use. I'm actually going to do portrait orientation for this. That makes more sense with the composition. And then, as you can see, I have my glass palette out right here. Okay, and I'm actually just gonna put my paint right out on it. So right in front of my study. My study will be here. The paint will just go right near me, and that's gonna work out really nicely. So I have my rag, my painting rag. I have a range of oil paints, and I'm gonna talk to you about what I picked and why. I have a range of brushes, and I've got my Catalyst brushes out today. Okay, so I have a Again, a range of sizes. Let me go ahead and tell you the numbers as I look at them. These are polytip bristles. They work really well with both oil and acrylic. And then mine get really dirty. So looking for my sizes is a little funny. So this is a bright, and that's an 8, okay? Both of these are bright 8s, if you can see those, okay? I also have, what have I got here? Another bright. This is another bright, and I believe, if I'm correct, yeah, same size. So bright 8s, all of those. Kind of like a larger brush to flatten, work with the initial stages of my composition. And then I only go small. I don't go that small because I'm kind of expressive with my brush stroke. This is a bright, and that's a 6. Okay, you could go down to a 4. I do have 4s. This is a round. Okay, and that, I'm looking again for the number, that's kind of worn off. But this is somewhere also around an 8 or a 6 or something like that for the round. This is actually a bigger round brush. And what am I going to use that for? I'm going to use that for my drawing because I'm going to use paint to draw on here. I do, as you can see, the canvas that I'm using has a ground and a base. You can choose to do that. You can actually add some pigment to gesso if you want to do that, or you can just actually take a little thin wash of oil paint, like a mid-tone gray, and you can cover your canvas. And sometimes it's really nice because it gives you a really nice start to your work in a nice base. And this is going to be, I'll basically draw into it, and then I can work lights against the mid-tone. Okay, so that's kind of up to you, but I like to work with a base, and we are working with Greyscale, and so you're gonna get to see how that works. What do we got over here? Well, I have got, sorry about that, my linseed oil. I'm gonna pull that in. I actually use kind of cheap linseed oil because I like the running quality of it, and I use it just to really thin the paint. I'm not a big medium person. I kind of paint a little thickly, so I don't need it that much. This is to clean the brushes, but I try to use it sparingly. You can degrade your brushes if you keep dipping them in that. So try to stay away from doing that too much. And then I put a little bit of that into some linseed oil, and that actually can be used both as a medium and to clean my brushes. So it just depends. If I was going to use it as a medium, that would be more for a wash type situation. I'll show you how that works. But once I start to really get painting, I just add more linseed oil to that. Again, this tutorial is going to be in acrylic. In oil. Scratch that. It's in oil. What I meant to say is that I'm not doing acrylic today. So if you're using acrylic, you'll need to mix with water. You can use matte medium. The colors will be similar, but the mediums and how you thin or use the paint will be different. What else do I have? I have titanium white. I have some ivory black, just in case you got some. You just know that you can keep it around if you feel like you need it. That can be useful in case your gray or your dark isn't what you want it to be, okay? But I'm gonna keep it out for now because we're gonna get more creative with mixing. I have French ultramarine. I have a cadmium orange, okay? I have an indigo and a Venetian red, okay? So this is kind of an earth tone gray that I'm gonna make over here. And this, let me move this down a little bit. And this is gonna be kind of your classic complement gray. So hues, earth tones, and you're gonna see how I do that. We always need white because we need to actually open it up, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and get started without further ado. Let's start with the complement mixing. Now, you can actually make an orange from red and yellow. Sometimes that's the way that we wanna do it. But you can also use equal parts or something around there of blue and orange, and you can make yourself a gray. Remember, complements are best friends and worst enemies, okay? Now, apologies, there's a bit of a glare here. I know that I have a skylight, so I'll do my best to, it's a little hard on the camera to see all the nuance, but I'll do my best to kind of talk you through it. So that's French ultramarine, kind of violet leaning. And I'm just gonna dab in a tiny bit of orange, which is really strong, okay? And what I can see, again, it was not the same amount, okay? Now I'm gonna show you, if I put more orange into this, way over here, I'm gonna get this really kind of browny look, okay? I want something that's more true gray. So I'm gonna keep a little more sparing, okay? Now when it's this dark, you can't really see what it looks like. So what I do is I take a little bit of white paint, okay? Hold on, white paint's a little hefty here. I put that out as well, just kind of in the middle here. That's fine for now, okay? And I take that white paint, and it's called opening up your color. So I put it here with my finger on the palette, and I grab that color that I just made, and I test it here to see what it looks like. And it looks like it's a cool gray. It's got kind of a violet hue to it. If I go here, it looks like I have kind of an orangey. That's a very warm kind of orangey gray, okay? So either one will do. It just depends on what you want. But that's a way to see it. I can't see it here, but I can see it better here. Could also use them in tandem, okay? So if I had an area that I wanted to be warmer, I can use that orange mixed gray. If I want it to be cooler, I use that one here, okay? The next one is indigo. So these are kind of earth tones, and this is gonna be kind of a funky one. This is a blue, as you can see, it's kind of blue-green. It reads a lot like phthalo, if you have phthalo. And then Venetian red, which is my favorite earth and what I use for underpaintings, okay? So, here we go. That's there. So in Venetian red is highly pigmented. So I'm gonna actually add more indigo here because to cancel out that Venetian red and make it look grayish, it's gonna take a little bit. It's very highly pigmented. Okay, but this is kind of an earth tone gray, and this is gonna give you a whole different situation. So when I get something that I think is grayish, I'm actually going to, like I said, open it up, and that looks grayish to me. It's got a lot of that indigo flavor to it, so maybe I'm gonna add a little more of the Venetian, and we're trying to get to as gray as possible. So when you finish the piece, or if someone's looking at it, they think it's a grayscale painting, not a blue painting or a red painting or something like that. And I think all of these succeed. So these are grays with temperature. Again, if I just go ahead and put out my lamp black right over here, okay, and add some white to it, I am going to get gray, but it's gonna be very basic. It's not gonna have the nuance that these other grays have. These other grays are kind of more like working with color. They're interesting, they're vibrant. They lean warm and cool, so they go a bunch of different directions. So it kind of really is up to you. What are you looking for? I would say just go black and white if you're gonna do an underpainting, so you're gonna do grisaille and then glaze on top of it. If you're actually just creating, this is gonna build to your accent colors and you're really working towards the finished piece without glazing, I would say actually mix your grays and give them a temperature. That's gonna be, in the end, a better outcome, okay? Great, so let me just pause for a moment, and I'm going to lay out the composition here, and I'll kind of move this up a little bit and lay out the colors on this side. I'm probably gonna go with this mixture, which is the French ultramarine and cadmium orange gray mixing. I'm gonna stick with that. I kind of like that for this composition. Again, I have these ones over here, but I'm not gonna use them this time, okay? I just wanted to show you what the options will be. So I'm gonna clean this up a little bit, and then I'll be right back with the painting. Okay, so I moved the canvas up a little bit in hopes of covering the glare, and then you'll see I'll mix here with the colors. So when I get started, I always make enough gray to get me through a painting. Probably gonna need a little bit more than I have right there. Again, it's more blue, so it's not equal parts. Apologies if I kind of said that early on, not what I meant. It is more blue than it is orange, and that's giving me a cooler gray. So I'm gonna take half of my blue here, and then just maybe, as you can see, with the palette knife, kind of hold that out there, a little bit less. What I'm looking for is that I'm deadening, or I'm kind of killing that blue a little bit, but I'm not making brown. I don't want it to be brown. I still want it to be dark. And one of the ways that you can look at that too. Now, I did this real fast because I've done this many, many times, okay? You might take a minute. So don't be discouraged if you didn't get exactly what you see here in the tutorial the first time. I've done this a lot. So kind of have a feel for it at this point. What you want is the value of this mixture to match the value of the blue, but not look blue. Okay, so that's what you're looking for. Again, if you're not sure, you can take a little bit of white. Again, I do it with my finger, open it up a little bit. That's good in my opinion. That's pretty gray looking. The next thing that I'm gonna do is create a couple steps to my mixture. So I'm gonna do medium tone, okay? And then one little light tone, okay? And what I call it is stringing out the color. I make color strings so that when I'm painting, I can just kind of grab from them, and then I can take dark, medium, light, and then I can add a little bit more and add a little bit less, and I can kind of just get a bit of a flow, okay? So when I'm painting, I try to just get into a rhythm. I've gotten really used to mixing over time, and one of the things that I also think, depending on what level you're at, if you've painted for a while, you kind of get used to that flow. If you're a little newer to painting, get used to mixing kind of your markers, basically. Dark, medium, light, or you can do a couple more steps like that if you're not comfortable. And that way, you're just kind of really looking at the subject, or, again, if you're working abstractly, you're kind of feeling your way through the piece, but you're just really grabbing, where they are, and you're not having to mix too much or think about it too much. So again, if you're newer to painting, I would actually make bigger piles of paint so you don't have to keep stopping and mixing so much. And that will give you time to just really engage with the subject. This is already getting kind of messy, that's funny. When I work with oils, I draw with the brush onto the canvas, and what I use is a lighter color. I do have a mid-tone ground. If you have white canvas, you still want to use a lighter color, not the darkest one. Okay, so I'm going to actually now take the medium that I have, which is oil and mineral spirits. Okay, or Gamsol, that's what they're odorless mineral spirits. And I'm going to go ahead and draw out my composition. Now, good composition, I can always change it based on what I see, but right here is the horizon line. I can see that in my photo. I like to keep it in the lower third. Don't cut anything in half, okay? Again, this is just a simple lesson in drawing. The ellipse of the top of my mug here. Sometimes I just make a little mark. So one of the things, if you're kind of new, if you're drawing and painting, you can just you mark out where the edges are, and then I make a nice vertical line so that my drawing is balanced. I make a mark where the bottom is going to be, and then I kind of join the outside from there. Okay, and I do it very loosely because we're going to just paint all into that, so none of that's going to matter in the middle. I'm just kind of diagramming it. Again, with the handle, it's quite a simple object, so it's nice. It's sometimes not to worry too much about the rendering, so you can just really think about the value, the shape, the nuance, okay? And then the handle is here, okay? And so this is kind of the skeleton framework. The main thing is that the cup here was at eye level more, and so I won't be looking down into it. When I get to the bottom of this mug, okay, there's gonna curve it a little bit more, and you can even exaggerate that because they're going down the surface. I do also have a shadow here at the bottom, but mine gets cut off, but I'm gonna compositionally bring it out a little bit because that's gonna be nice, okay? There we go. And that's that, okay? So that's the drawing. Again, I'm gonna make some adjustments, so if that handle went too close to the edge, I'm gonna change it so it doesn't. And then if I want this to be a little bit wider or out, I can do that too, okay? So it's really up to you. How do you want this composition to work? I pulled the shadow down. I cropped it a little bit more than I see in the subject, okay? Because that's nice. If you use edges in that way, that feels good, okay? Those are my mug. Very simple there. Okay, so now I'm gonna get to painting. I'm gonna put my round brush aside. That was just for drawing. Again, I always have, I'm going to use a towel for now because it's a little bit smaller. It allows me to get into the edges, okay? And now I'm going to just block space, okay? So here, Again, go ahead and take some of the paint off of this brush so I can reuse it for a different value. I've got my oils open here, linseed oil, so you'll just see me dip if I feel like the paint needs to move. If the paint is working, if it's not too stiff on its own, then I don't dip it in the linseed oil. We'll just kind of see how the paint feels. And the early layers, I do tend to paint looser, so you're gonna see me kind of do that. Okay, so for my composition, I see that actually this inside of the mug and the background, they're all kind of the same value. They are kind of what I have for the base, but just for the sake of this exercise, I'm gonna paint it over one more time. So I'm taking from my darker gray, because you can see this one here was lighter, right, than the base, okay? So what I need to do is take from the darker one and I kind of mix them in. I'm not taking the darkest dark, but I'm mixing that in. And then I'm gonna go in and I'm going to, it does match the base and that's nice. And I'm gonna go in and kind of get rid of, you know, things where I see, you know, kind of make it look integrated, okay? So I'll use some of the base, which is a little bit warm, and then my gray that I mixed here is on the cool side. Cool side, sorry. Lost my word there. But mine's on the cool side. So what I can do is I can use some of that cool in the background here. Again, it's the same value. And then in the front, I can actually stick with some of the warms if I need them, right? So if I'm going to, this shadow could probably just sit, it's the same value, could be darkened a tiny bit, okay, in spots, but it's really kind of the same as my base. So I'm just gonna let that go for now, okay? I'm gonna take this background shadow again all the way down to my line. So I'm starting to get rid of my drawn lines. That is key. I'm gonna start get rid of those. Not lose the subject too much, okay? And then actually, right about here, my table lightens, okay? So I have one little area here. I'm still using the same brush. I'm not changing it up because this is loose and this is my oil, underpainting. Okay, so I can kind of let it be loose, a little bit messy, let things bleed into each other. I do like to do that. It gives kind of a nice soft edge, okay? And now I'm actually gonna switch over to my lighter gray value. So I went right back into the white, okay? And then into my lighter tone, and I'm bringing that into the front. So you can see, again, for any of you that do decide to work with a toned base, I do recommend it. You can see you're starting to lighten it up. There you go, that light really pops, doesn't that? Okay, and then I'm gonna blend here, okay, because those shadows aren't that harsh. Okay, there we go. Kind of bringing up. So I'm working in the reverse a little bit, kind of letting those lights pop as I let the shadows. And again, there's all these kind of feedy, fun little shadows that happen here, okay? Blend that in a little bit so we get this little like smoky ambiance, okay? Again, you can see if you use that toned base, you get to your product pretty quick when it's grayscale, okay? Now I'm also going to do the front of the mug. Now the front of the mug and my source image is not super bright, but I have the choice of brightening it up. It might be better for the composition, okay? So I'm actually gonna go back into my white. I'm just going into my straight white, and I'm gonna have a little fun with this. I'm actually gonna dab a tiniest bit of orange into it. Tiniest bit, I don't wanna change it so it looks orange, okay? But what's nice about this is you see, if you do it really subtly, you can get this kind of bright glow up against the bluish nature of the other gray, okay? So I'm gonna go, again, watch, I'm using a big brush, and I might actually use two brushes now, okay? So that I can go back and forth between, give myself kind of these cute little blended edges. So again, I'm using brights, they're flat. To kind of work back and forth between the foreground and the background. Now this mug just really comes out of space. My values are real close, but I kind of like that. That's the way that I work a lot. I like this kind of nuanced, ghostly feel of things, and that you're building. I don't like heavy contrast. That's kind of me. I like a very subtle look. Okay. And then again, I'm going back and forth between the both brushes. Okay, just kind of letting also the paint blend. Sometimes I kind of make a mark where it's a little more structural. Okay. I go across the surface. And sometimes I just, so sometimes that gives it, sometimes if you block it in, you get a little bit more of an edge. But then sometimes you go in and you just let everything blend together a little bit. That's nice too. So that gives us smoothness, a subtlety, kind of a smoky feeling to it. Okay, so I like to go back and forth. You can have a bit edges that do both things. Okay. Here at the top, I have this bright highlighted rim. Again, I've built up that mid-tone, plus I had the base that was a mid-tone. So this is really gonna stand out when I put that in there, okay? And then the top of the mug, like that, and like that, and then down here, okay? Right against there. And that's that, okay? For now, okay? So what you would do at this stage is you'd actually let this dry a little bit, okay? You don't wanna be too hasty. Let it dry a little bit. This is kind of a first to second pass combined, okay? So anything that you kind of have to work wet onto wet, take care of right now, okay? If you don't want anything too dry and crusty. And then come back after it's dried a little bit and start to work where you want things to be sharper and more defined, okay? And that can be anything for you. I really strongly recommend if you're working with a subject for this, try to keep it simple. Try not to make it too complicated so you can experiment with stroke edges, you know, really push your mark making. Think of the economy of mark making. You can see how quickly I got this mapped out. So you might want to think about, hey, how do I just really get effective here, okay? Where are edges not outlined, but do they kind of blend? That's very pretty. So you can see I'm kind of blending that into the background to some degree, and then I can go ahead and I can even come in and pull it out from there. Or if I decided just to do a sharp highlight when it's dried a little bit, look how nice that is. You really get a feeling of space, okay? So I want you to just really think about atmosphere, edge to edge, not outlining the object too much, and then see how, with economy of stroke, how far you can get with the first pass, okay? Again, if you feel like working with a base, you can see how nicely that base will set this up for you. I think it's a really effective technique. And that's that for today, okay? I'm gonna wrap it up, and then again, always let me know, even in YouTube or in the announcements, if you have any questions. I want to thank you for joining me in the studio again today. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Again, another circle on grayscale and value, but this time we're really thinking about how we mix those grays and how we can even lean them warm or cool. You can apply this to just painting an object, or you can also even just play around with it abstractly and kind of look at temperature, mood, dark to light, and mark making as well. Okay, have a lovely rest of your painting session if you're painting along with me, and another tutorial will be coming soon.